The invention of the cotton gin, the Louisiana Purchase and Missouri Compromise, the Second Awakening and Manifest Destiny. These, along with many other important events from 1800 up until 1860, helped fuel the expansion of the United States. Manifest Destiny, although its exact terminology was not introduced until the Mexican-American War, was a belief that was strongly embraced by Americans as it opened economical doors for the citizens and political advantages for the nation as a whole. In 1794, Eli Whitney invented a machine called the cotton gin. It was a series of blades, combs, and brushes which removed seeds from cotton, normally a painstaking task, at a breathtaking pace. But due to patent issues, it was only made available to a select few and wasn't manufactured on a large scale for another few decades. It more than tripled cotton production from 700,000 bales in 1830 to 2.9 million bales in 1850. The cotton gin increased the need for land and slaves to ensure there was always a large enough area that they could grow it as fast as they could manufacture it, and a large enough workforce to collect it. In 1800, Thomas Jefferson won the presidential election, beating out Federalist John Adams, thus ushering in the era of Jeffersonian democracy and the Democratic-Republican Party. 3 years after coming into office, Thomas Jefferson made the Louisiana Purchase from France for $15 million. This purchase more than doubled the total area of the United States. This was not the initial plan, though. Jefferson first sent his representatives to buy just the city of New Orleans for $10 million, but Napoleon, on the brink of war and in dire need of the money, was faced with a unique opportunity to sell something that was useless to him. He counted for $15 million for the entire Louisiana territory. That's less than 3 cents per acre. Many people became outraged that Jefferson would allow the purchase and called him a hypocrite for not sticking to his philosophy of a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Both political parties were concerned that his decision might be unconstitutional, so it was brought forth to a vote in Congress. The purchase was approved by a vote of 59 to 57. Shortly after the purchase, the famous Lewis and Clark expedition began in 1804. The purpose of the journey was to find a waterway to Asia and find out what lucrative exploits the unexplored territory contained. 2 years after departing for their journey, they returned with many new documented plants and animals, and the successful journey helped strengthen the idea that having the United States span coast to coast was not only possible, but was our destiny. At the same time as the Lewis and Clark expedition, a movement was beginning to take place. It was called the Second Great Awakening. Many preachers caused controversy in the South by traveling there and preaching of the evils of slavery. The spiritual speeches inspired a man named Gabriel Prosser to rise in rebellion, but it was crushed before it even started. Many people in foreign countries felt the desire to come to the United States as a result of the Second Great Awakening, because it opened their eyes to how much religious freedoms we truly have. This movement continued to grow exponentially until the 1870s when it began to die down. On many separate occasions, the United States offered to buy the Florida territory from Spain, but was declined every time. Due to the countries in South America rebelling against Spain in 1819, and they having little to no military force present in Florida, accepted the Adam-Onis Treaty, presented by President John Adams under the condition that would claim liability of the damages done by revolting American citizens to a sum of $5 million. In 1820, a compromise was brought forth to temporarily help appease both the North abolitionists and Southern pro-slavery supports. The compromise was called the Missouri Compromise, which forbade any states above the 3630 line from becoming slave states with the exception of Missouri, and to balance the state's power in Congress, the compromise would also allow Maine to become a state. The South accepted the deal because land above this line was hard to work and yielded little crop. Many people opposed the compromise and called it a temporary fix, including Thomas Jefferson, who said this:
"But this momentous question, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I considered it once as the knell of the Union. It is hushed, indeed, for the moment. But this is a reprieve only, not a final sentence. A geographical line, coinciding with a marked principle, moral and political, once conceived and held up to the angry passions of men, will never be obliterated, and every new irritation will mark it deeper and deeper."
The compromise was nothing more than putting a band-aid on a crack of a breaking dam. Probably one of the most important documents of this time period was signed by President James Monroe, 5th President of the United States. This document was called the Monroe Doctrine. It made an agreement between us and the owners of neighboring colonies to discontinue their acquisition of land in the Americas, and in return we take a neutral stance to European colonies already established. This doctrine helped ensure a more peaceful expansion of the United States. Due to an increase of farmers, less and less land became available in the South, and so the desire to annex the Lone Star Republic of Texas and gain control of their land increased. President John Tyler and Congress failed to negotiate terms for annexation that both Texas and the United States could agree upon, but landowners had become so desperate for fertile land that a new proposal came forth. one that said Texas keep all of its public debt endowed to Texas itself rather than being paid to the United States, and also being given the ability to divide into 4 separate states if desired. This offer was accepted and Texas was admitted to the Union as the 28th state. While the Monroe Doctrine currently protected us from any foreign threats to our goal of expansion, there was a growing domestic threat that began to grab our attention. The further west we pushed, the more we began to run into the spears of hostile Native Americans that had no intention of letting us take their land simply because a piece of paper said we owned it. Andrew Jackson was elected in 1828, and just 2 years later he passed the Indian Removal Act under his viewpoint that this emigration should be voluntary, for it would be as cruel as unjust to compel the Aborigines to abandon the graves of their fathers and seek a home in a distant land. But they should be distinctly informed that if they remain within the limits of the state, they must be subject to their laws. In return for their obedience as individuals, they will without doubt be protected in the enjoyment of those possessions which they have improved by their industry. Many tribes, unwilling to comply with these terms, set out on what is known as the Trail of Tears, peacefully and without conflict. This trail was a long, vigorous trail leading to a reservation set up in the land of what is today Oklahoma. A few tribes retaliated when forced to follow the set standard to be exiled, namely the Cherokee, Muskogee, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw tribes. The Seminole War between the Seminole tribe and Florida lasted for 10 years and resulted in hundreds of casualties. The greed for agricultural and in turn economical gain amounted in the acquisition of over 100 million acres of fertile cash crop land. Mexico was still heart-set on claiming the Texas territory as its own and was outraged when it joined the Union. This was the start of the Mexican-American War. The war was expensive and cost thousands of lives on both sides, but only lasted 2 years, from 1846 to 1841. During this, the use of the phrase manifest destiny was becoming widely adopted and known as a justification of war and violent means to reach from coast to coast because it was God's will we do so. The war ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which was a Mexican cession of the California, New Mexico, and Utah territories to the United States, as well as establishing the Rio Grande as the border between Texas and Mexico. We also acquired the Oregon Territory by dividing along the 49th parallel with Britain. During the war with Mexico, another conflict was taking place. One of many new churches that had sprung up during the Second Great Awakening was being persecuted and evicted from their land. It was the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, more commonly known as Mormons. In 1838, possibly one of the most heinous acts passed by a state was placed in effect in Missouri by Governor W. Boggs. It was called the Extermination Order, which allowed and encouraged any citizen of the state to murder a Mormon on sight. They were exiled to Illinois, and after being attacked, the church fled by handcart to the Utah Territory in 1847. This was the first large group of settlers to travel west due to extreme religious oppression. In Sacramento Valley, 1849, the first gold nuggets in California were discovered. News spread like wildfire all throughout the nation until many people had decided to abandon their homes, jobs, families, and farms to travel in search of treasure. The non-native population at the end of 1849 was over 100,000 people in comparison to less than 1,000 non-natives in 1848. The people that entered the state in 1849, more commonly known as the 49ers, undoubtedly increased the speed at which California could be made part of the Union. At the end of 1849, California applied for statehood as a free state, which caused controversy between the North and South, as it was separated between the two. To help even the playing field, they allowed California to join as a free state under the condition that Utah and New Mexico were given the option of popular sovereignty, the ability to choose for themselves. The gold rush was by far one of the most important events sparking expansion as it sped up the process of admitting states to the Union and getting people to migrate west so we could secure our hold on the land we had obtained. After taking all the Mexican cession for such a low sum of money, some people believed the next transaction we made with them was more or less conscious money, to help us not feel as guilty about taking what we did, and to help improve our relationship with Mexico. We paid $15 million for approximately 43,000 acres of land. The land was considered no man's land as it suffered from constant Indian raids and lack of military presence and authority. The Compromise of 1820 was now at risk of being destroyed by a new request of statehood called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This would allow the territories of Kansas and Nebraska to enter the Union under the idea of popular sovereignty. Many people emigrated to these states in hope of casting their ballot in the decision. Pro-slavery activists resorted to threats and acts of violence in order to secure their idea of thinking in Kansas. Many people from northern states moved to Nebraska to support the vote there, and many slave owners, primarily from Missouri, immigrated to Kansas with the goal of admitting another slave state to the Union. Anyone who rejected their ideas was punished for it. Kansas received the name Bleeding Kansas during this time period due to all the bloodshed that was taking place there. There are many factors that can shape the course of a country, but there are only 3 core characteristics which truly decide the destiny of that country. The religious state of mind, the political values, and the societal development of the United States is what laid the foundation for the growth that it experienced for 60 years, starting at the beginning of the 19th century.